Coming up on Bridge City News, a protest against the Lethbridge face covering bylaw took place at City Hall. We have new COVID-19 numbers and details about which provinces have seen triple-digit increases. And new Tory leader Aaron O'Toole is named his shadow cabinet and will release his plan on how the Conservatives will get our country back in black financially.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a few weeks now since Lethbridge implemented the mandatory face covering bylaw, and not everyone is happy about it. A group of protesters who oppose the bylaw gathered at City Hall on Tuesday afternoon. Protesters believe that City Council is taking away their rights.
The province didn't make it mandatory to wear a mask, and they're the health board, they're the ones governing stuff. Why didn't they make it mandatory? Because they know legally they don't have a liability. They're vulnerable to that as well. So now the cities, they leave it up to municipalities, and now the cities are saying, oh, it's mandated now, you have to wear a mask. But who's going to enforce it? The businesses now have to enforce it. Now who's responsible if someone protests that? You give me a ticket as a business and I fight it in court, what's going to happen? Who's liable to that? The business, not the city now. So they're already taking that liability and passing it off to the businesses and making them be the bad guy for a law that they put into place, making it mandatory.
Why would a completely healthy man, I'm 51, why would they make me wear a mask? I'm not sick. The ones who should wear a mask should be the people who have been sick, not the healthy people. If anybody needs to have a mask. I don't think nobody needs the mask. I mean, if you got sick, you stay home, you sick it out like back in the 70s and 80s, and that's it.
The mandatory face covering bylaw for all public facilities is in effect now until the end of December. The protesters then stormed into council chambers just as City Council was about to begin. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman, alongside with other council members who voted in favor of the bylaw, left the chamber. Meanwhile, councillors Ryan Parker and Blaine Hagan, who opposed the bylaw, were applauded by the group. Spearman and Parker shared their reaction of the protest with BCN.
This was fairly mild compared to what has been happening. We've seen it in the U.S. and people are, they get into physical intimidation and other things which are unfortunate. That didn't happen today. But certainly we recognize that there's division on the issue. We had 40 people, I'm guessing, expressing that perspective. I'm sure they represent many more. But the community can be divided, but the best way to deal with this is to work together.
It did surprise me a little bit because it's been 2 weeks since we had that vote, and sometimes people just kind of go, well, it is what it is. But as you can see, this is really built up in the community the last 2 weeks, and people don't like it. And my emails have been, I would say, strongly 80% against the bylaw. I thought it was very well done. They were very respectful. They didn't take up the whole council meeting. And you know what? It was democracy in action, and people had their voice heard in the people's chambers, not being council chambers.
The mandatory mask bylaw for all public facilities is in effect until the end of December. The City of Lethbridge is working towards a makeover of its transit system. City Council has approved the piloting of Transit on Demand and City Link. The two initiatives will apply more direct routes and a model that caters to its riders.
The biggest thing for transit today is that it's a step in the right direction in terms of moving forward with the City Link. What City Link is going to do for the community is it's going to provide straighter, more direct routes, and that's going to be good for the majority of our patrons. So now they'll have the opportunity to utilize Transit on Demand in those times after 7 when we see a reduction in our ridership. And they'll be able to connect onto the City Link and be able to utilize our conventional transit system.
The new system will take up to 12 months to be fully operational. There's been a positive case of COVID-19 at the Raymond High School. The Westwind School Division received a call from the AHS on Sunday confirming that a student tested positive for the novel coronavirus. School officials say only one student contracted the virus and parents were notified of the positive case. Officials say classes will continue following the positive case in Raymond. In recent days, 4 other schools in southern Alberta have sent letters to parents informing them of a positive case of COVID-19. They include Bridlewood School, St. Angela's School, and Lester B. Pearson High School in Calgary, also Lawrence Grassy Middle School in Canmore. Our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says the coronavirus cases in schools came from community transmission and were not linked to transmission within the schools themselves.
This is another reminder that one of the best ways to keep schools safe is to bring down our community transmission rates. With the rise in active cases, we are looking closely at trends and locations of exposure throughout the province. One of the things that is showing up is a higher percentage of new cases that are close contacts of known cases. I know that one of the things that will help with limiting spread from cases to their close contacts is improving our turnaround times to get results back to those who have been tested.
The province has completed over 1 million tests to date. There are currently 1,692 active cases of the novel coronavirus in Alberta, including 38 here in the South Zone. The Horizon teachers have authorized a request for a strike vote. Teachers employed by the Horizon School Division, number 67, have voted 87% of authorizing the Alberta Teachers Association to request a government-supervised strike vote. Teachers in and around Taber area have been without a contract for around 2 years now. Have you ever wondered what creatures roam the grasslands of Alberta? The Grasslands series at the Helen Schuler Nature Centre is an interactive exhibit that highlights the many animals and landscapes around the grasslands of Alberta. As Micah Quinn explains now, the display showcases special paintings and drawings from a Lethbridge artist.
When you walk around the Grasslands series display, you'll notice taxidermy, paintings, and drawings, and they're all the creation of artist Colin Starkevich.
I paint wildlife mostly all throughout Alberta, but the grasslands holds a special place in my heart, and I know it's my muse, and I want to portray the grasslands the best I can through my artwork, as I feel it's a region that's quite overlooked when it comes to the conservation of the land.
Starkevich works in 3 different styles, which include fine art studio pieces, field paintings, and erratic drawings.
Here's an example of one here, and these pieces are created in oil and acrylic paints back home in my studio. The other 2 pieces you'll see in this show are what I call plein air paintings, also referred to as field paintings, and they are paintings that I do in oils on canvas and masonite panels. So the erratics are small or large boulders that are scattered all over the prairies left behind by the last ice age, and I create these drawings of them.
Starkevich says he wants his work to focus on the positive aspects of wildlife conservation.
This painting depicts swift fox, which are a fox species here in the grasslands region, and the title for this painting is Beating the Odds, and I decided to give this painting this title because the story about the swift fox is a conservation success story.
The Nature Centre says the exhibition has been especially popular with visitors.
I think the realism accurately captures a lot of those finer details and that subtle beauty. Colin also has done a great job of layering in sort of multiple different senses experiences. So we do have an audio component that really does allow you to immerse yourself as if you were out in the grasslands checking out some of these really cool animals.
The Grassland Series display will be open to the public until December at the Helen Schuler Nature Centre. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The province of Saskatchewan was inspired by former Humboldt Bronco Logan Boulay and his organ donation, and they did something about it. Logan's father, Toby Boulay, said in a Facebook post that he was happy to hear that Saskatchewan would be launching its first ever online organ and tissue registry. Through his tragic passing, Boulay's son Logan has inspired thousands of Canadians to register for organ donations. An official with the province of Saskatchewan spoke about the importance of organ donation. Anyone over the age of 16 can register to become an organ donor. The president of the Alberta Medical Association says the attack which killed a doctor in Red Deer has highlighted the importance of safety for doctors and clinics across Canada. Dr. Christine Molnar says it's a complex issue that no single organization can address on its own. Dr. Walter Reynolds, a 45-year-old father of 2, was attacked by a patient with a hammer and machete at a walk-in clinic on August 10th. Alberta doctors say there needs to be standards on how to manage difficult patients who may be aggressive or suffering from a mental illness. Cannabis. It's a plant that many Canadians use for health reasons. But what about the side effects? Jacqueline Smith is the Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. She says people really need to do proper research and educate themselves before even considering using cannabis.
That you have to be a very informed consumer. You have to be very, very careful about the research. I can tell you that there's a lot of profiteering going on and that panacea effect, there's people making a lot of money on products, topical as an example, creams for your skin. There's no strong evidence to suggest that these products are actually effective, but people are paying a lot of money for these products.
Professor Smith will have more on the pros and cons of cannabis coming up after business news. New Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole is naming a shadow cabinet, and his predecessor Andrew Scheer landed the role as the CPC's infrastructure critic. Ontario's Pierre Poilievre is staying on as finance critic. Calgary MP Michelle Rempel is being promoted to health critic, and New Brunswick's Rob Moore will become the justice critic. Also, Ontario MP Michael Chong will become the foreign affairs critic. Critics are government minister main questioners in the House of Commons and are supposed to be ready to move into their offices if the opposition took over and formed government. The Tories will have their national caucus meeting tomorrow, and O'Toole says they will soon present their own plan for economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. A wildfire which burned more than 600 hectares north of Banff National Park over the weekend is now being held. Alberta Wildfire says cooler temperatures and rain have helped crews get control of the blaze north of Canmore near Black Rock Mountain. The fire was first reported last Friday, and while it was burning out of control for several days, fortunately no buildings or communities were threatened. Meanwhile, south of the border, rescuers and military helicopters airlifted more than 200 people to safety after an explosive wildfire trapped them in a popular camping area in California's National Forest. Dozens of fires are still burning in the coastal state. So far this year, wildfires in California have burned around 4 million acres.
I'll tell you, the crews were absolutely ecstatic when they came off the helicopters. All of the individuals that they rescued were greeting the crew members with hugs as they were boarding onto the helicopter, and then again after getting off the helicopter, a lot of high fives. And for the crews, without a doubt, it was a very, very rewarding experience. They were glad to be a part of the mission, and they're actually excited to be a part of the mission tonight in the event there's more people that need help. So there were a total of 2 aircraft, one UH-60 Blackhawk, and then the other was a CH-47 Chinook. They did a total of 3 trips last night, and then today they we're actually sending additional crews out there. Right now the weather's not cooperating, but as soon as the smoke does clear a little bit, we'll send more people up.
A new report from Compassion Canada says Canadians have now donated $1 million to help combat COVID-19 around the world. The funds have enabled churches in various communities to provide aid and to become a stabilizing force. With their global partners, Compassion Canada has delivered close to 5 million food packs, given over 3 million hygiene kits, and assisted close to 240,000 people to receive medical care. Thanks to a remarkable acceleration of translation work despite the worldwide pandemic, Wycliffe Bible Translators reports the Bible is now available in more than 700 languages around the world. As we hear in this next report, this breakthrough comes at a time when people have been reading the scriptures more than ever during the global lockdown.
A new milestone has been surpassed as the Bible has been translated into more than 700 languages. Wycliffe Bible Translators says this breakthrough is indicative of the acceleration that's happening in the work of Bible translation, to the extent that it's impossible to state which translation was actually the 700th. James Poole is Wycliffe's executive director.
Lives are changed when people get the Bible in their language for the first time. And so 700, I mean, it's a round number, it's a cause to sit back and celebrate. But really, we just praise God that there is so much going on, so many things happening simultaneously that all around the world, every month. In fact, actually, I can tell you now, hot off the press, September, we're actually up to 701 full Bibles now. There's always new things happening, new things going on. And it's just really wonderful to see what God is doing.
Paul explains why giving access to the scriptures across the world is so vital during this global pandemic.
If globally people have been reading their Bibles more this year, then that is a wonderful thing that God is doing through all this sort of COVID mess that we're experiencing. And who knows what God's greater purpose is, that he would cause so many people to access his word this year all over the world, and how the church may grow through this hard process. I think it's very exciting.
Now they've surpassed this latest milestone, Poole concluded by sharing their long-term plans.
We think the next 10 to 15 years we'll get from 80% of the world's population with the Bible in their language up to 95%, which is a tremendous milestone. It's 95% of the world's population. And also, not only that, we think we'll get from today 90% of the world's population with a New Testament in their language. That could rise as high as 99.95% in the next 10, 15 years. So we're seeing around the world, we call it the Bible translation movement, more and more people getting involved alongside Wycliffe Bible translators and alongside other partners in this vital work that is essential for life transformation, for church growth and so on worldwide.
Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
It is back to school for millions of students around the world. For some, however, it's not in person, but still online during the pandemic. A teacher from a public school in Lagos, Nigeria, is helping her students across the country learn math virtually while dealing with coronavirus restrictions.
This color is color red, so that is under what called property of self.
COVID is here with both positive and negative impacts. The positive impact is that we can use technology to teach our students now, and which I'm very, very happy about.
I started slow at first, but with the way my math teacher was teaching, holding the sessions, I started learning differentiation rapidly.
Despite the annual Labor Day Classic being cancelled in both Calgary and Regina, some fans still celebrated the CFL in their own way. Football fans flocked to Mosaic Stadium yesterday for Saskatchewan Rough Rider Day. The drive-through event saw 600 cars and the event was sold out. Fans collected team paraphernalia from the comfort of their own vehicles. Team officials said it was important for the team that fans had the chance to really show their spirit. That's great to see. Do I ever miss the CFL and watching football? We had a couple of cool days and a stretch of them. Fortunately, the warmer temperatures and sunshine will be returning. Complete weather details are on deck. We had much warmer temperatures across a lot of southern Alberta today. Tonight, just a few clouds developing with a low near 2 degrees. Tomorrow, lots of sunshine with a high expected near 21. Thursday, sunny again with a high near 24. Friday, sunshine with a high expected of 23. Not a bad weekend is shaping up either. Sun mixed with clouds and a high of 19 on Saturday, mainly sunny and 27 degrees on Sunday. Lots of blue sky and sunshine again on Monday with a high of 25. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 21 degrees with an average low of 6. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1981 at 33 degrees, and the record low was -3 in 1943. Sunrise was at 6:58, sunset at 8 o'clock. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Victoria and Vancouver will both be clear and a high of 27. Lots of blue sky and sunshine is on tap for Calgary on Wednesday and a high of 21. Just a few clouds and 22 degrees for Edmonton. Sunny and 20 for Saskatoon tomorrow. Just a few clouds and 19 for Regina. Expect a cloudy day and 17 in Winnipeg tomorrow. A chance of showers and 19 for Toronto on Wednesday. Showers and 16 is on tap for Ottawa. Periods of drizzle and 18 for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, expect an overcast day and 28 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Periods of drizzle and 26 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Just a few clouds and 24 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 26 tomorrow. The union representing Canadian auto workers has chosen Ford as its target for a pattern agreement and contract negotiations with the 3 Detroit automakers. Unifor National President Jerry Diaz said Ford was chosen in part because workers at its plant in Oakville, Ontario are the most vulnerable in the union. Unifor has been pushing for commitments that new products will be made at Canadian plants, especially electric vehicles. Ford could be facing a strike if a new contract is not reached by September 21st. Tesla stock slumped just over 14% this morning amid disappointment that it will not be joining the S&P 500 index in New York anytime soon. The company behind the indice has announced the inclusion of several companies in the benchmark index, including Etsy, but not the electric vehicle manufacturer. Some investors thought Tesla would be added to the list, which can create large bouts of buying index funds automatically fold the stock into their portfolios. General Motors announced it has signed a $2 billion deal with startup Nikola. That is its second major electric vehicle partnership announced in less than a week. GM stock will take an 11% ownership stake in the company and will engineer and build Nikola's Badger hydrogen fuel cell and electric pickup truck. The Badger is expected to be in production by the end of 2022. Beyond Meat will begin making plant-based meat in China later this year under a new agreement announced today. The California-based company is building 2 facilities outside of Shanghai. Production will begin later this year, with full production slated for early next year. Beyond Meat Products made their Chinese debut in April at Starbucks, which sells the company's imitation beef in lasagna, pasta, and a spicy wrap. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 118 points on the day to finish at 16,099. The Dow was down 632 points to 27,500. The S&P 500 was down 95 points to 3331, and the Nasdaq was down 465 points to finish at 10,847. Oil was down $3 and a cent today to $36.76 per barrel. Natural gas was down 19 cents to $2.40. Gold was down a penny to $19.3202 an ounce, and silver was also down a cent to $26.66 an ounce. Wheat is at $214 per metric ton, barley's at $210, canola's at $511, and corn is at $238 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $1.33 to $105.78. Feeder cattle were up $1.35 to $139.85. Lean hogs were up 8 cents to $59.90. And the Canadian dollar was even on the day at $75.54 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, anti-mask protesters stormed Lethbridge City Hall earlier today, angry about the city's face-covering bylaw, which is in effect until the end of December. The protesters argued that the masks violate their rights. The fine for not wearing a mask in a public facility in our city is $100. There are many supporters of cannabis. Some say it's proven to help alleviate pain and suffering. There are others, however, that say it can be dangerous and quite addictive. Here what Jacqueline Smith, the Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the U of C, has to say about the pros and cons of cannabis in just a moment.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Beginning September 9th, Lethbridge's Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program will take place Mondays and Wednesdays from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. behind Nicholas Sharon Arena. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come enjoy an hour of fun and get active. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. 2020 marks the 40th anniversary of Terry Fox's Marathon of Hope, which will be held virtually on Sunday, September 20th. Support a worthy cause your way by registering as an individual, a family, or a virtual team. To find out more, visit terryfox.ca. Go back in time and see what it was like to live as a pioneer. Coyote Flats Pioneer Village is a Western heritage museum located 1.5 kilometers south of Pitcher Butte. Walk through the village and see a railway station, post office, fire hall, school, and so much more. The museum is open daily from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with admission of $10 for adults or $20 per family. Mobility scooters are available to guests by donation. For more information, visit coyoteflats.org. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Now that cannabis is legal in Canada, more people are using it for health reasons. How effective is it, and what are some of the health risks associated with it? Joining me now to talk about it via Skype from Calgary is Professor Jacqueline Smith, Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. Jacqueline, welcome to BCN.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
So what are some of the benefits of using cannabis for medical treatment? I know some people use it for pain relief. Are there other potential benefits?
Well, what I do want to say, cannabis has been around for a long time, but because it was an illegal product for so long, there was minimal research. So we are starting to do some research, but it is still in the early phase. What we do know that is cannabis now is being recommended for pain associated with palliative care. So those who are, again, palliative. Also for nausea and vomiting in relation to chemotherapy, for spasticity, for multiple sclerosis. And just recently, in the last couple of years, it's now being used for treatment-resistant epilepsy in children.
Wow. I have members of my family who are seniors who like to use it for their fibromyalgia and their osteoarthritis. Your thoughts?
Well, cannabis is a very complex compound, and there's lots of different cannabinoids associated with that. So I think the research right now is very, very interesting because they're starting to isolate some of those compounds. And I have heard in research that there is an anti-inflammatory property to it. My caution is, again, this is early research, and you have to have a really critical eye when you're looking at research, because some research, they do it with small participants, number of participants. Some research is not being replicated. We're not seeing random control trials as well too. So I'm concerned there's a little bit of a panacea effect right now, and where cannabis is being recommended for everything under the sun. Now, I want to position myself as someone who sits on the fence. On a personal level, I can tell you that one of our daughters was treated for a cannabis use disorder. And, but also my father, who's passed away from cancer, used cannabis for pain control. So again, I think we have to be very cautious. I am a researcher. We did some research with students at the University of Calgary, and we do know that many young people are using cannabis, and they're saying that it's effective for their anxiety, for their depression, and for their sleep, and for their pain. And we don't deny the fact that people are experiencing positive effects, but what we're saying is that also alongside the positive is the potential for risk, because we don't know the long-term consequences of someone who's using a product over a long period that has not been thoroughly researched.
And I've heard students as well, they like to use cannabis and the cannabis oil when they're vaping and their vaping products. But let's talk more about the larger or more growing demographic, and you say it might be seniors?
Yes, we are seeing a rise in the senior population using cannabis. Again, caution, because when you look at some of the effects, the side effects of cannabis use, it can cause some coordination problems, some dizziness. So we do worry about seniors who are using cannabis and may be at risk for falls, not to insult any of their intelligence, but I think what's really important is that when you are seeing a healthcare practitioner, so we have physicians and nurse practitioners who can prescribe it. So when you're seeing them, you want to be sure that they are thorough in going over the side effects and the potential risks, the potential benefits, and looking at some of the contraindications as well for people who are wanting to use cannabis. And there are some, if there's a family history of psychoses or just substance use problems, that is a concern. And of course, very, very strong evidence with cannabis use with those who have a predisposition, again, towards psychoses or schizophrenia. That's very thorough research, and we know that people are at high risk of psychoses or schizophrenia as well, if they have a family history of either of those.
So what is it in the cannabis itself, doctor, that provides pain relief? Is it the THC, the CBD?
That's a very, very good question, and one that we really emphasize now when we're educating our university students. A lot of people don't understand that cannabis is, the two main components are THC and CBD. Now, THC is a psychoactive, mind-altering substance, whereas CBD is non-intoxicating. So most of the research, I actually read a systematic review today in preparation for this interview, and it's 2020 January. And what they're saying is that most of the research now is favoring CBD as a potential substance that can help with things like we're talking about pain. There's some early research around anxiety as well, social anxiety. I did see research connected to PTSD and to sleep disorders that are associated with PTSD. So again, I'll caution, all of those studies that I just shared with you are early. So again, we have to be very careful when we're looking at the research. The ones that we talked about at the beginning for palliative pain, for spasticity, for the nausea and vomiting, and for the treatment-resistant epilepsy, solid research. But the others that we're talking about now, we have to be careful with.
When I talk to chefs about cooking, a lot of times they say, Hal, the best way to release the lycopenes in the tomatoes is when you cook them instead of eating them raw. And I thought that was interesting. Is it very similar when it comes to cannabis, that people actually smoke the cannabis as opposed to edibles? to get the most bang for their buck, so to speak?
Well, that again, you're just bringing up some really great questions. So there's a difference between smoked and edible. One is the effect. So when you smoke or vape, typically you're starting to see an effect within 10 minutes that peaks at 30 minutes. With edibles, sometimes it takes up to 30 minutes to feel the high if you're using the THC, and then that sometimes takes up to 4 hours to peak. So the problem is those who are accustomed to getting that quick high from the smoked cannabis and are then trying the edible, they're, let's say as an example, they'll eat a brownie and within 10 minutes, they're waiting for that high that they normally get from something that was smoked, and they'll eat another one and another one. So that is a concern. In fact, we are seeing data out of Colorado where there's increased visits to emergency now because of intoxicating effects. So basically overdosing on cannabis, and you would see things like psychoses, increased heart rate, paranoia, definitely concerning symptoms. And again, the concern with the edibles is that now we're dealing with children, with pets, and the caution is if we're making an informed decision as adults to use it, we have to be very, very careful with our children who may be curious, or with our pets who just may eat something that fell on the floor. So
yeah, I'm wondering how dangerous that would be for, like you said, your pet or your child, a baby, a toddler, to get a hold of some of the edibles. How toxic that may actually be, how dangerous.
Well, and again, a good point. It can absolutely be dangerous. When we're talking about THC, we're talking about a psychoactive, mind-altering substance. And for pets as well, we're seeing more research where vets are seeing animals coming in with intoxication as well from cannabis products. So I think what's really important to bring out as well is that there's different concentrations of THC in different products. So they can have a level of up to 99% THC, whereas you can get as low as 4 and 5%. On average, we're looking between 30 and 40 concentration levels of THC. So it's, again, I hope what's coming across here is that you have to be a very informed consumer. You have to be very, very careful about the research. I can tell you that there's a lot of profiteering going on, and that panacea effect, there's people making a lot of money on products, topical as an example, creams for your skin. There's no strong evidence to suggest that these products are actually effective, but people are paying a lot of money for these products. Is there potential for research to prove that they're helpful? Absolutely. But my line is that I think we're flying a plane as we're building it. So we have to be very careful, and you have to know that you can trust your healthcare practitioner, again, that they're doing all the screening questions, they're giving you the risks and the benefits. There's no really standardized dosaging right now as well too. So what they're saying is you want to start low and you want to go slow. And for those who maybe are used to smoking cannabis and are switching over to the edibles, they have to realize they are not going to get the effect as immediate as they would with the inhaled. So there's so many different variables to consider, again, if you're making the decision to use.
One of the stories we had on Bridge City News last week was down in the United States, how people are using CBD oil on their pets, like their dogs, saying how it's helping with the pain and their suffering. What are your thoughts on that, using it on our pets?
I think, again, in all areas of cannabis research, it's new. I do research with humans, so I just know that that's another area that we have to be very cautious with. And again, I think there's a potential for profiteering from promoting a substance that's effective when in fact it hasn't been thoroughly researched.
Some say cannabis is not addictive at all, but others say it really can be. What does the science say?
The science says there's absolutely a diagnosis for a cannabis use disorder, and it's found in the diagnostic manual of mental health disorders. And absolutely. And people, I've actually seen the comparison between coming off of cannabis as coming off cigarettes. So there is that withdrawal as well. There's definitely the tolerance as well, where people are starting with smaller concentrations and having to go higher with THC as well, toxic levels to get the benefits. So all the same symptoms of other substance use disorders. And I can definitely tell you, I'm also a clinician who has worked in the area of addiction and mental health, and I've absolutely seen cannabis use disorder amongst youth. And youth is an area that we need to be very, very cautious with, because we know that the brain continues to develop up to the age of 25, even 26. So while the brain is still developing, our youth are at a greater risk of problematic use because of their developing brain. And the research says that the earlier you start and the more frequent you use, the more risk you are of creating of cannabis use disorder or problematic cannabis use. So I think a lot of research, especially from the Canadian Centre of Substance Abuse, they're putting out a lot of literature around caution with young people. And again, we know they're using, in fact, Canadian youth are among the top youth in the world who are smoking cannabis. So we're paying particular attention right now to that.
Are there any potential problems if you consume cannabis edibles along with alcohol or maybe some medications?
Absolutely. We are definitely seeing, if you're consuming alcohol and cannabis, you can potentiate the effect of those two. We do know that we've done a lot of work around impaired driving with alcohol. We're also now having to move forward and look at impairment from cannabis use. And I think we're having to re-educate our young people, because what we do know is the fact that the government has, Health Canada has legalized cannabis. We know now that the perceived risk for young people is going down, and we're seeing a reciprocal effect with that too. So as the perceived risk goes down, use is going up. So the message to a lot of young people is, well, it's legalized, it can't be that bad. So we're really having to do the education again around the CBD, the THC, around the developing brain as well too. And what I do know, that our young people are smart and they want to know what the science is saying. So I think we need to teach our young people to make informed decisions. And I think, again, there's a lot of really good research. Canada's lower risk cannabis use guidelines. It's a harm reduction approach. But again, it's giving all the information. It's saying, if you choose to use, these are the things that you should be aware of. So again, giving people the respect and dignity to make the decision and to make it in an informed way as well.
And another thing, when we were talking about some of the long-term detriments or the effects of using cannabis, when you go to the Canada-US border and you want to enter the United States, they ask, have you ever had cannabis? Have you ever smoked pot? If you say yes, good luck getting into the United States right now. That's another danger.
It's true. It's true. I mean, Canada has legalized it federally, and you're seeing across many states in the U.S. they have legalized it in some states, but they have not across the country. So they're protecting their people. I appreciate that.
Professor Jacqueline Smith, Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. Thanks for your time today.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
It seems much of the Western world turns to science for answers rather than to faith. But can faith and science coexist, get along with each other? Today's guest has some ideas on the subject. Dr. Andy Walsh is a molecular biologist and author of Faith Across the Multiverse, Parables for Modern Science. Andy, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hi, thanks for having me, Hal.
Now, you say that you hope the book will introduce readers to God and that science can actually coexist, and maybe science can help in the process. How so?
Yeah, so the idea in this book in particular is to use the language and the concepts of contemporary science to talk about Christian theology, to talk about ideas from the Bible, as a way to maybe introduce those to folks who aren't familiar with the Bible or haven't had the opportunity to read it for themselves, and even for Christians who might be familiar, to talk about these things that in a new way, to maybe help them think about things like God's grace or the nature of Jesus and his divine and human nature, things like that, in a new way by using new language and new metaphors for them.
Now, you make quite an interesting statement as well. You do not have faith in religion. Can you explain that?
Sure. So it's not that my faith in the practice of Christianity or the traditions of Christianity so much as faith in the person of Jesus Christ for ultimate salvation. Right, so that's who I'm ultimately interested in following, and who I'm ultimately interested in introducing other people to is Jesus of Nazareth, and the God that I believe that he incarnated and who we meet through the Bible. And so the Bible is a good way to get to know the person of Jesus, but that ultimately he's the one that we're trying to get to know better.
Now, you're right that your belief in God is informed by historical corroboration of the Bible. Can you give an example or two?
Sure. So we have, archaeological evidence of different events in the Old Testament, various of the kings of Israel and Judah and so forth. Certainly, the captivity and the various empires that are mentioned in the Old Testament, match up with lots of other historical records. Then there's also, evidence of the life of Jesus of Nazareth himself from other sources outside of the Bible, and certainly other events that are mentioned in the Bible related to who was in charge, who was ruling for the Roman Empire and so forth at that time. So there are reasons to think that the texts were written by folks who lived during that era and were familiar with what was going on.
Why do you say the work of faith is to discern the meaning and what we observe in the world around us?
Okay, so one of the early chapters in the book talks about the concept of faith and relates it to mathematics and the mathematics of information and communication. And so communication and information theory is something studied in math, but we don't have so much a model for what a message means, so much as measuring the size of the message, or how much of a file size or how much of a bandwidth we need to communicate a particular message. Meaning is something different. It tends to be relational. It requires that both parties, the sender of the message and the receiver of the message, agree on some common meaning and some common way of interpreting that. And so as a Christian believer, our faith is part of our faith is accepting a common meaning with God, that God is trying to communicate some meaning through the Bible, and that we're trying to find that shared meaning with him by entering into a relationship with him and interpreting the Bible and interpreting the natural world as his creation in a way that is consistent with the meaning that he intends to communicate.
Now, you break your book into 4 different sections. What are they, and why did you choose them?
Yeah, so the 4 sections deal with the language of mathematics, with physics, with biology, and with computer science. And I chose them for a couple of reasons. First, it's just those are the areas of science that I was most familiar with, partly through my formal academic training in biology and later in computer science, and also areas that I was just familiar with from having read a lot of books sort of as a side hobby. I also felt that it was a helpful progression going from abstract ideas from mathematics through to more concrete ideas and encountering the actual physical world in physics and biology. And then computer science deals a lot with practical questions of how do we accomplish particular tasks.
Now, can you explain exactly what you mean by God calls us to balance justice and mercy, Andy?
Sure. So that's from another early chapter from the section on the language of math, dealing with how the concept of optimization can help us to understand things like sin and obedience. And so the question becomes, what are we trying to optimize? What are we trying to make the most of in the world? And it seems like 2 important such concepts are justice and mercy. So justice being the idea that fairness, that if somebody does something wrong, that there is some accountability for that, some sort of either punishment or reconciliation or restoration that needs to be accomplished. And also mercy, the idea that we show some leniency to people that have done something wrong, that we don't punish them to the full extent of the law or what have you. And so balancing those two things, we don't want there to be no justice in the world, but we also don't want there to be no mercy. And so finding some combination of those two things that is optimal seems to be what the Bible is calling us towards.
Why do you call a gracious universe one in which life is possible?
Okay, so that deals with the idea that chaos mathematics, the idea of things having sensitivity to their initial starting conditions, but also having some notion of being attracted to a particular stable pattern, not a particular stable point, but a dynamic stability, a pattern that recurs over time, that is an illustration of grace and God's grace. And we see a lot of systems in the actual world, both physical systems and biological systems, that exhibit this kind of chaotic attractor pattern, where dynamically the system will change over time, but it will tend to stay in a particular pattern that is stable. One example is our heartbeat, actually. The pattern of cells contracting, the nerve cells and the muscle cells working together exhibits that kind of behavior, where if one nerve cell or muscle cell gets a little bit out of sync, goes a little bit too early or too late, it'll tend back towards a synchronized setting so that your heart is pumping consistently and all those cells are working together to pump your blood, as opposed to getting out of sync and then just getting further and further out of sync and becoming completely disordered. So that tendency for the system to come back to a stable, ordered, consistent pattern is what makes life possible and is best modeled by this kind of chaos theory mathematics. And that's just one example of many where that kind of pattern of grace, that tendency of the system to come back to something stable, is exhibited in actual systems in nature. And so it seems to be a feature of the universe that does, in fact, make life possible on all different scales.
Now, you write that the life of Jesus challenges our popular notions of what is significant or distinct about humanity. How so?
Sure. So talking about Jesus, one of the things that we like to say a lot is that to err is human, right, and to forgive is divine. And I was thinking in particular when I wrote that of a movie in which that's kind of the rallying cry of the hero of the film, is that humans are going to make mistakes. Yet Jesus seems to live a perfect life, or at least that's part of Christian tradition, is that Jesus lives this perfect life, and yet is also fully human. So maybe that kind of capacity, we might have the capacity to make mistakes, but it's not necessarily a necessary part of the human condition, but simply an observed part of the human condition.
Living here in southern Alberta, Andy, we're very blessed because we can go hiking in the beautiful southern Rockies. I'm a big fan of that myself. How is the natural world a true signal from God?
Yeah, so as a Christian, we certainly believe that, I believe that God created the world and that it expresses some sort of his intentions for what he thinks is good and beautiful and worthwhile. And so the kinds of things that flourish over time in that creation are, I think, an indication of the things that are important to God. And so, we see in our experience that life flourishes, that love flourishes, that love is something that, is possible in the universe and that seems to grow over time, that the more you show love, the more the love there is in the world as opposed to diminishing. And, same with life seems to be growing in abundance and in diversity over time. And so I think those things reflect the character of God and reflect the kinds of priorities that God has of what he would like to see more of.
Now, you say it's fairly easy to assess ourselves by what is going on around us, becoming a product of our environment. How do we get away from that tendency?
Yeah, so I think that that's part of the value of being involved in something like the Christian tradition and the Christian church, is having accountability to other people and having accountability to the examples in the Bible. So you have some sort of external reference that you're looking to for a model of what is ethical behavior, what is moral behavior, what is the good and true way to live.
Now, your book also has a chapter on the entropic principle. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Okay, sure. So entropy is a concept from physics, and it deals with it's often described as the tendency of things to tend towards disorder over time. But a slightly more helpful way of thinking about it is the balance between symmetry and asymmetry. So things becoming more symmetrical over time, meaning that you can swap around the parts and not tell the difference at a sort of large scale that you've made any sort of changes, that those little changes don't matter. So the more asymmetrical something is, the less entropy it has. And living systems, such as ourselves, show a high degree of asymmetry with respect to entropy. And so the Entropic Principle chapter talks about that we're called to be living sacrifices, that we're called to sort of set our lives down to follow Christ and on behalf of other people. And so taking those things that make our lives asymmetrical and ordered and allow our own lives to proceed, and sharing those with other people, maybe even taking on some amount of disorder or symmetry in our own lives so that we can share life with other people in big and small ways.
You talk about the idea of the Bible as a genome of the church. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so the genome is a concept from biology. We're talking about the sum total of the DNA sequences in all of our individual cells. Every cell in your body has a complete copy of your genome. They're all essentially identical, and they're all unique to you. But each cell has its own copy, and each cell is expressing that genome in different ways. So not every gene that genome encodes is expressed by every cell all the time, but they're expressing different genes at different times. That's what makes your different cell types in different parts of your body different. Similarly, the Bible is the full message of how the church, where the Christian tradition gets all of its doctrine from and ideas from, theology from. But no single person is expressing that entire Bible all at once. Even though we all have access to the same Bible, we're all referring to the same Bible, we're going to be expressing different parts of that Bible at different times in our own lives and corporately as different church communities. And so it kind of just has that same sort of function of informing what we do, but not being able to, but each person expressing it uniquely or bringing it to life uniquely. And so it's the sum total of the whole church over time that expresses the entirety of the Bible rather than any individual person at any given moment.
Now, Andy, when the Bible talks about man reflecting the true image of God, what does that mean? Does that mean that you and I look exactly like God, created in the image of our Heavenly Father?
Right. So in the Christian tradition, we don't think that God has a physical self in that same way. So it's not so much that we are physically resembling God, but more that we have been called to represent Him on earth as a ambassador. Some people use that word or something like that, and that there may be certain characteristics of how we live our lives or how we interact with each other that reflect God's principles or personality or priorities. And so, for example, we believe that God exists in a Trinity, and so there's some relational nature to God in and of Himself. And we see that same relational nature expressed in the church. That Christianity isn't fully expressed, as we just talked about in the genome concept. Christianity isn't fully expressed by any one person living their own life by themselves. Christianity and the Bible are fully expressed in a community of a church, and so that relational aspect of our Christian faith, it reflects some aspect of God and is an image of God, at least, if not the full expression of what we mean by the image of God.
Now, in your book, you refer to the Creator as a just-in-time God. Can you explain that?
Sure. So that just-in-time is a concept from computer science. It talks about how we take computer code that humans have written and translate it into machine instructions that a computer can actually execute. The first kinds of compilers did that all in advance. So you would write a computer program, and then you would send it to the computer to compile, and then you could run that program over and over again. More recently, we've developed systems where you can actually run a program as you're typing, as it's going along. You can execute each instruction individually. And then just-in-time compilation is a balance between the two, where you write the code in advance, but the computer is translating it into machine instructions as it goes, and translating different parts of it just when they're needed to be used. And so it's an efficient balance sort of between the two notions. And that kind of pattern seems to be something that we see in the Bible, where God is expressing intentions in advance, but the way that they are realized in particular circumstances sometimes are adjusted to account for the particulars of those circumstances, the choices that individual humans might make, and so forth. And so there's this balance between God having an intention that He's expressed for all of time and how that intention is realized by the circumstances of individual lives. That seems to be conceptually kind of similar to that just-in-time idea.
Now, you're right that simplifying the Ten Commandments were a way for God to provide order and information sharing. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so right there's a challenge of communication. A big part of the Bible is just for God to express Himself to us, to get across ideas that we otherwise wouldn't know about Him. Right? We don't have direct experience of God. We don't have the same kinds of experiences God experienced because we have a different sort of body. We have a physical reality that's different from God's experience, and so God has to find ways to communicate across that experience gap to us. And things like the Ten Commandments represent different parts of God's communication and a way of expressing His intentions and His desire to know us and to be known by us.
Dr. Andy Walsh, a molecular biologist and author of Faith Across the Multiverse, Parables for Modern Science. Thanks for joining me today from Pennsylvania.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.